Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 20th of April, 6 days before our in person in Aylesbury. And we're talking today on the subject of endings. We are hoping still to have Andrea Woolhead with us, Andrea D. Woolhead with us, who's written a biography of a former major general in Assad's army. And so we would have covered non-fiction. We can still obviously talk about it, but hopefully she'll be with us, pop in at some point. But in the meantime, we have Damiano and Jill who write crime novels. HJ who writes a bit of everything, short stories, novellas. Phil writes science fiction, fantasy novels. So we do have a good mixture of fiction here. And HJ was just telling us of his rambling and is considering writing non-fiction. So certainly talk about non-fiction at some point, if whether Andrea is able to join us or not. So the main question is, we'll start with Damiano, crime novelist, but you read science fiction fantasy. What do you think an ending should do? Big question.
I think an ending should leave the reader wanting more, not necessarily kind of in this again a continuation of a story, but wanting more from the author. I think it should I think it should tie up a story to a certain extent. Um, but I think the worst possible thing that it could do is leave people going meh.
Yeah.
I think it has to elicit a strong enough response that they think, do you know what? I really enjoyed this. This was a lot of fun. I,
Mm,
I want to carry on. When's the next book coming out? Or is
absolutely.
where's if there already is a next book, right? I want to get that. So that's the kind of key feeling I think that
Yeah.
readers should have from an ending.
No, absolutely. I mean, you said exactly that it has to tie up the endings because we'll talk about HJ writes short stories and novellas, as do I, and write longer pieces as well. And so we will look at the differences between in the short form endings for the short form and long form. Do you are an avid reader, Damiano?
Yeah.
Um, do you presumably you read standalone novels and you read series?
Yes.
Do you think that um, if you're reading a book that you know or writing a book that you know is in a series, is it okay if you do leave some things, perhaps not the main plot for that book, if you do leave some threads open for a continuation?
Absolutely. I think that I really quite enjoyed that as well. I think like within a story, within a novel, you kind of want things tied up, but the ending doesn't have to be an ending. An ending could leave readers with a lot more questions than
Mm,
they started with.
mm,
Um, I think if you know the book is standalone, um, obviously it has to be tied up. But even then, even if it's a standalone book, if you're still left with questions, that's not a bad thing as well, because the point then is that you continue to think about it and you'll
mm.
remember it. Um, I think it's obvious when you know a book is a series, or it can be obvious because you have you have character arcs, and they go from one point at the beginning of the story to the end, but you know that that's not the end of the main plot. Um, that's fine. But it still has to feel like you're not it's not drifting, and
Yeah.
it's not carrying on for the sake of carrying on. Like obviously, if I have a book two and then a book three and a book four, and it's you're kind of tying in readers for the long haul.
Mm,
Um, but only if the book contains each singular book contains a good story, um, and that the ending leaves them wanting more.
mm.
But yeah, some of the best like books I've had are the ones that where at the end of it, I'm like it's tied up, but I have questions
Right,
like that.
right. Jill, how do you decide? Because you write series or have written a
Yeah,
series.
well, I am writing series.
Yes. How
I
do you
mean,
decide? How do you decide where to end each book? Obviously, the main. I'm guessing you do tie up your main plot. Do
yes.
you think, okay, well, this is more relevant to perhaps to book two than book one? Do you find it quite organic when you're writing it, thinking, oh well, actually, this doesn't fit here, but it could fit in another book?
Um, not so much the ending, but I do take little paragraphs and bits out and have another document that's called bits to save or something like
Okay.
that. So I think, oh, yeah, I might use that another time. But
Yeah.
um, I think as regards to the endings, I do try and tie it up. And also, it annoys me if I read a book and I've got too many questions at the end that I feel are never going to be resolved. That would annoy me anyway. And I don't
Mm.
want everything to be left till I have to wait another year for another book to come out as a reader, I mean.
Mm. Sure.
But I like to leave a little bit of uncertainty so there's something I can take forward. Or certainly, the book I brought out I had published in the autumn, this last autumn, that has a kind of a natural sequel to it because there's obviously something that, although the characters think it's resolved, there's a doubt as to whether it's unfinished business. So that was easy, that I could sort of make it seem that it was tied up, but it wasn't quite kind of.
Yes.
And yeah, there were a couple of readers said, "Oh, I wanted that tied up." I said, "What kind of is?" But I thought, well, at least that makes them read the next one. And I don't, in a way, I don't think you'll ever please every reader, whatever you do. It seems to me. I mean,
Mm.
there was one of the or the other, there was like sort of two antagonists, I suppose, really. One of them, although that person did die, there was somebody complained that they didn't have a nasty enough death. I
Oh,
thought, well, I can't
okay.
get that.
Nice.
But anyway, I don't know. They were far too horrid. They should have died much more nastily than that. It was a
Right.
bit harsh. But anyway, so you're never going to please anyone. But I think the thing that I struggle with more, that I work longer to try and get right, is where you have your, like a, because I'm doing obviously crime novels that come to a kind of a climax, as it were. And then after that, I'm also aware, I don't know how long to make the bit after that, where you've got to explain everything, but you don't want people to feel like an anticlimax. So
Mm.
that's quite tricky to get the length of that and the tension of that enough that people won't think, well, I know, I'll give up now. Then
Right.
you want them to go right to the end and find out how it all works. So I suppose you have to. I think I've tried to address that by leaving various things not tied up, so that people will want to keep going because there's so many loose ends otherwise. But yeah, I think that's the hardest bit, really.
Right.
Uh,
Phil, thank you. Phil, you write sci-fi fantasy. Do you find what does an ending have to do for you in your genre? And do you find that you write differently because of your genre?
Ooh, that's it's a good question. I mean, I guess for me, so I've written a series of 4 books at the moment,
Mm.
and so kind of a lot of the sort of things people said so far kind of really chime in terms of, so within that series there is an overarching story arc, but each book has its own plot, its own mystery, its own thing to solve, and the ending has to deliver on that book plot.
Mm.
Um, and but I mean, I'm terrible for throwing things in as I go. So there were all sorts of unanswered questions from sort of side plots. I very much take the view that when you are when you are when you're going through the world normally in our everyday lives, you come across all sorts of things that you don't quite understand, you haven't quite figured out that, but they don't matter in the moment, and those are often the things that I then pull to kind of to carry on the overarching, and I sort of pepper the books with those things. So I like to think that my books deliver on the promise of the book plot each time. So the big questions, the things that were posed, certainly anything thematic about the book, that kind of has a resolution and an ending at the end. A couple of my books do have what I would consider to be cliffhangers at the end, but in each case, I think I hope I've wrapped up the plot of the book and then taken a step back and gone, yes, but there's a piece of the jigsaw that you're not seeing, and maybe that's related to one of those things I threw in earlier. Maybe it's not, but that's kind of, I think, the way I balance off having a satisfying ending with getting people to want more, because I hate it when I get to the end of a book in a series and I feel like all they've done is kind of left it like you would at the end of a chapter. So a cliffhanger at the end of a chapter is very different, I think, or should be very different to the cliffhanger at the end of a book. Cliffhanger at the end of the chapter, everything can be up in the air because you're going to read the next chapter. It's designed to make you want to keep reading. The cliffhanger at the end of a book is designed to make you want, if you've got a series, is designed to make you want to keep reading, but you have no real control over how accessible that next part is. If you've just published the book, the next one might not be out yet. The person may only have the current one and may not, but there may be other stuff they want to read, and it's going to be a while till they come back to your series. All sorts of reasons. I'd love people to read all my books end to end and become obsessed, and that's great. But realistically, like, readers have massive stacks of things they need to read, so that's not how it works. So I think even if you've got a cliffhanger at the end of the book, you need to deliver some kind of satisfaction. The key questions that people have had, you need to deliver on those in some form. You need some kind of emotional weight at the end there as well, so that people walk away kind of feeling like, okay, that was a book. I've read a book there. I finished. Not, right, I've got to the end of the pages, but I haven't finished. I'm just hanging.
Left hanging. Yeah.
I think that is a balance. Is it particular to my genre? I don't know. It particularly is. I mean, all of the bad examples I can think of, in terms of where I felt that unsatisfactory kind of, they are often sci-fi fantasy series, but I read quite a lot of those. I do think with some genres, so crime being one, like if you have a crime novel that doesn't give you at least some idea of what happened and who the murderer was and how it happened, and even if you then pull the rug and go, well, there's something you're not saying, if you don't deliver on that in some way, then you're kind of missing a key beat. So I do think it's not as necessary in my genre, but having said that, it is necessary. But I think so I'll rephrase that. I think maybe sometimes people don't view it as being as necessary. There isn't a, it's not like romance where there's some kind of happy ever after, or that kind of conclusion. It's not like crime where there's something to solve.
Yes.
So you can kind of leave things a little bit up in the air, but I really don't think you should.
Yeah. Certainly not the major plot.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
Thank you. HJ, you write shorter pieces, my favourite form. Do you have an idea of your ending when is it sort of generally complete story, start, middle and end? Or are you very much a discovery writer where you get an idea and then find the ending when you get to the ending?
Well, because you've heard my voice a lot lately, Morgen, and also because I'm prone to ramble, I've actually written short, sharp responses to each question. I should also say I totally agree with what Damiano, Jill and Phil were saying about satisfying the reader, making them want more. But I write character a lot. I love writing character, and I find the characters, they act up. They let me down. They get in the way. They do unpredictable things, and therefore they have a big say in my endings. Maybe sometimes they leave it till the very end to even find themselves. So to answer your question, no, I don't. Sometimes not until I reach the final paragraph. I'm just a chaotic writer. And sometimes I don't get time to write. I have to rush it. I've sometimes left open endings, but my best open ending in Beings, our neighbor, who turned out to be one of my lovely reviewers on Amazon, popped round to our drinks party and said, "When are you going to write Beings 2 then?" And she's a sage Chinese woman and knows what she wants. But I don't know when I'm going to do it because I'm very busy these days.
Right.
Doing all sorts of things like this.
Isn't it nice though that somebody wants more of what you?
It's a great feeling, particularly since I didn't realise that she was the reviewer, and she gave my favourite type of review, which is the review that says enough but not too much about what's in the book.
Yeah, yeah.
But no, I admire Phil, Jill, and Damiano for being so organised. I mean, a series, good grief! I could never in a million years write a series.
Mm.
I just haven't got
Well,
the
that's actually lazy.
organisation or patience to do that. So
Yeah,
congratulations.
well, I don't know why the others did, but I suppose really I just did it because the characters wouldn't get out of my head. And then once I thought, well, I'll just do that one. I'll try it then. But then once you actually get into it, in a way, it's easier to do books more quickly because you don't have to start from scratch with the main characters every single time. Because I don't know about other people. It takes me quite a long while to get into the heads of a new main character. And it's very nice if you start writing and you know what they're thinking before you start typing. Really,
I love the way your characters behave themselves, Jill. I mean,
well, they don't behave themselves, but they do it in chapter one.
No, they kill, don't they? They kill people. No, that's true.
I know what they're doing on the first page, and so I'm in charge of where they start. What they do then, they very often misbehave. So because I don't plan it to the end, really, I've got an idea. Normally, I've got an idea for the character arc. I know what problem I'm going to set the main guy, and I know that I want to make that complete at the end. The plot they kind of do what they're doing with the plot, so that's not up to me really. But the character arc kind of is. I won't finish it until I've completed the character arc.
Yeah, no,
I'm slightly.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I was gonna say I'm slightly different in that when I start writing, I know I have the beginning and I know the end. What I don't know is how I'm going to get there. So that's the bit that kind of just is completely organic as I go along, and it's not a straight line at all. It goes all over the place. But I do know how I want the book to end, and I kind of work towards that. But then the fun is just not knowing, like a bit like life, you have a rough idea of like when you start your day, how your day is planned, but it doesn't always go like that, and you have random things happen, and that's kind of how I write. And when I wrote Bastard, which is the first book, I didn't intend for it to be a series. I intended for it to be a one-off standalone book. But I had so many people say what happens next, and not in a way so the book does all tie up, but it ties up in such a way that you don't know the final outcome. There's an outcome, but you don't know what carries on afterwards. And so I shelved my plans for the next book to write a sequel to Bastard, which then I'm going to tie up in a trilogy. So it does. So if I'm going to continue it, I might as well continue it, but then finish it, like kind of in that sense. But it was kind of organic to kind of go on to the next one. Part of the same story.
I'm just wondering, how late are your endings? Because obviously in a short story, often, and there could be a twist, or the ending is the final sentence. Are you conscious, Damiano, and then we'll go down, how late you want to have any kind of reveal or conclusion? Do you have it in certainly the last page, or the last paragraph, or even the last sentence?
It's in the last. So the certain things are tied up in the last chapter. The ending is tied up in the last page. That's how I wrote it.
Okay. Jill, do your endings vary, or do you tend to have them as late as possible?
Well, the first one, Echo of Bells, the one that became the kind of origin story, if you like, for the series, that one was very, very late because I couldn't decide whether to kill off one of the main characters or not. And I got really to the last page and a half before I decided which way it was going to go. And so you don't really know till the last paragraph on the last page. A reader doesn't know which way it's gone. So as far as that goes, that was really late. But I think with Avalon Sky, the next one, I kind of knew how I wanted to pan out. Although I didn't know the exact ending, I knew how I wanted the main couple's relationship to it, because they have a kind of a central problem, if you like, in their relationship. I knew how I wanted that to pan out, even though I didn't know how I wanted the ending of the crime plot to work. So to some extent, I made that kind of gradually work out through the book. So by the end, you kind of know which way it's going to go. So it's almost like a confirmation of how that works on the last page. But I think because it was one of these things where it was very much a loose end tying with other things, I couldn't make it totally suspense until the last page because there were so many. There's a little bit that you find out very, very near the end, but it wasn't the main thing. So by the time I got to the end of that one, it was different. It was just a different way of doing it. But with the one I'm doing now, that might be different again. So I don't know. But it is a bit organic, really. So because although I think sometimes I start a book thinking I know where the end's going to be, but then because the characters take it in a different direction, then I say, oh, right, then it's going to be something different. So it's a bit counterproductive to have, I find, just for me, I find having the end in my head because, like say, they don't always play ball. You then find the characters that go literally sometimes geographically somewhere different, never mind with the plot. So it just it is what it is, really. Whatever they do, they do. So,
yeah. How about you, Phil?
Yeah, I was just thinking about it. Kind of 50-50. There are certainly a couple of my books which absolutely end, if not the last sentence, and certainly on the last page. It's the real sort of final tying up is very late. But then also I think that a couple of them have it's kind of the second to last chapter where the ending happens, and then there's I don't know how to term it, like an emotional coda. So there's that was the end. That's the thing you're interested in, but you might also be interested in what the repercussions are for this character, for example. And so there's it's often quite a short chapter, but kind of just something on the end that kind of gives you a perspective on what that ending actually meant for the people that hopefully you've been caring about through the story. And I have used that also as yes, so this is the effect on this person, but ... so kind of the cliffhanger can come in there as well. But yeah, so a bit of both, I think.
Right, because the Harry Potter series had an epilogue in the seventh, the final book, which I think was 18 years later.
Yes,
he still had the scar. He was fine. He had a family. Everything was good.
Yeah, I've not quite done that. I find those a little bit, a little bit. No, I don't quite know what the word is, but,
no, it's okay.
But yeah, kind of.
That's
but
okay. I think because I'm not a fan of prologues. I think a lot of readers don't, especially if it's called prologues. If I get sent a book and it's called a prologue, I recommend having a location and a date. So say London 2012, something like that, because a reader will read it because it doesn't say prologue. So you're guaranteed that every reader will read it. And I say to the author, it's not your fault if somebody doesn't read it, but if they need to know what it is, then don't call it prologue. Or they need to read it, don't call it a prologue. But by the time they get to the end and it's all been tied up, they do want more. They're happy to have more. So if you have a bonus chapter or an unofficial or official epilogue, and they're all great. There's a bit more. I thought it was all over. As 1966, they thought it was all over. And you get a bonus at the end.
Yeah. So I guess that just tends to be my last chapter. I've almost got the opposite. I've heard people say this about prologues, and it always intrigues me because I think if anything, I'm the other way around. I'm going to read a prologue because how am I going to? This is important information for me to understand what's about to happen. But you get to the epilogue, and it's like that is the bit that's almost tacked on the end there, and that feels more optional. Particularly if I've been delivered a conclusion that I'm like, oh, I liked that. It's like, well, here's an epilogue. What if that's not lining up with what I kind of read?
No, exactly. Well, whenever I've done a planning and writing a novel course, I usually, when I was doing it for the local council, I'd have 16, 17, 18 people. And every time I ran the course, so I did it 3 terms for 4 years, I don't remember one instant where there was, maybe double negative, where there wasn't somebody who didn't read prologues. I never used to. I just wanted to start. It's a bit like having an introduction in a non-fiction book, and I didn't used to read prologues, but I do. I don't really read novels for pleasure because that's my day job. But I think if you need to know if it's vital to the book, then it needs to be read.
I think in fantasy, and science fiction, prologues are used a lot. I think you kind of, as a reader of that genre,
Mm,
you know to read the prologue
right.
because it's an intrinsic part of the story. It kind of often sets up the rest of the book. And it could, even just a short 1 page or 2 pager. I've read them so often that I will, every time I see it, I know it is a vital part of the story.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I will make a point of reading it.
Yeah. Well, I always say if you're going to include a prologue, whatever you call it, make it no more than 500 words, because then people are more likely to read it. And as you say, it does depend on genre, because fantasy and sci-fi books tend to be bigger, and so people want to get into the world that they're about to encounter.
Yeah, I did do a prologue in mine, although it's a crime novel. I put a very short prologue. It's less than a page. But the reason I put it, I'm not sure if I said this in one of these things before, but I put it there literally to cut to the chase, because it was the hook, really. There, because it's kind of an action bit, or a bit that anticipates action, that will draw the readers in straight away. Whereas otherwise, although I tried to start with kind of tension and conflict and so on in chapter 1, that was really had to be the family bit, and I didn't want it to read like a straight novel. I wanted it to be obvious to anyone who hadn't read the back that it was a thriller, so I had to really start with a bit further into the story,
right,
or cut somewhere further into the story first. And so I tried it out on some beta readers and said, do you think it's better just with chapter 1, or do you think I should put this bit in? And they unanimously thought I should leave it in, across various age groups. So I left it there. Nobody said don't call it the prologue, though. That didn't. I couldn't call it the place. I couldn't put the name of the place, because I didn't want to know where that was going to end, because that's where it ends. So I at the time I sort of thought, well, I don't even really. I could have put just the date, I suppose. But that was all.
Well, I think I have a client who in all of her crime novels, her prologue is the killer committing the act, and in one it's just called present day, and that's it.
Right. Oh, well, I couldn't call it that because I had to set it in 2019 for other reasons.
Right.
So it would have been a bit complicated, because it's all in 20. I mean, I have put under chapter 1 something like 16 days earlier or something, right. But I haven't. It's got a bit complicated trying to use.
Yeah, no, exactly.
Just the date, but then people would have to remember that if I put the dates. I thought this is getting a bit too complicated. So
no, well, you don't want to do anything that will throw the reader off at the
no, that's right.
The start.
I've never actually met anyone who said they didn't read prologues.
Right.
But perhaps I haven't asked the person the right question. I just. I mean, I've met you now, obviously.
Well, that's true. That's very true. HJ, how are you ever conscious when you're writing your stories of how late you leave your ending? Have you left it at?
Oh gosh, I think it's probably easier if I just give you a very quick rundown, because I'll just go on forever otherwise. Romance, an erotic romance. There's normally a fairly definite ending, but some, like Body Heat from Sister's End and other strange romances, are definitely open to speculation. In other words, did the man die during the act, or is he asleep? That type of question. Right. Dark horror. Think Carrie. Will the horror ever end? That hand coming out of the soil. What a great moment. I often think films when I write horror. With May, there's a Balti Hut restaurant scene unexpectedly at the end of the story that was quite shocking, really. Captivity. Who will the next victim be? What color will the hair be? And all this stuff. Two girls locked away in a garden shed in a secret garden in the middle of the forest, an adult fairy tale. Someone's gone off and left them there. That one did result in a next story. I've even tried a banal sub-ending. So as Robert Wellham of Brentwood Writers Circle said, Red Sparkle is pretty sickening in terms of horror. It involves a nasty jellyfish. But the man in the story, the partner in the story, fails to notice the change in the victim.
Your internet's been so good up to now. We had trouble in the past. We'll move on to the next question. We can always come back again. Phil, are there any books that spring to mind where you've
But no.
Phil, are there any books that spring to mind that you've read that you've just thought, oh, or film even, that you've got to the end and just thought, what? It's really been unsatisfying.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, yes, but so there are a couple of examples of books in my mind where I have had that kind of, oh, that was really just the end of a chapter and you've left it kind of thing. But I won't name them because they're both indie books and I don't want to.
Okay.
I don't like we're all plowing our own furrow here, and
Yeah.
personal taste is a lot of these
Sure.
things. I think in terms of interestingly, much as I love Project Hail Mary, I really didn't get on with the end of that book. And
Right.
again, I won't spoil it because it is really good and the film's really good as well, and everybody should experience it and form their own judgment.
Oh,
But I had theories, and this I think this is a danger with endings is I had from very early on, I had a suspicion that I knew what was going on. And there was going to be a big twist at the end that I was convinced almost up to the last few chapters was going to transpire, and it did not transpire.
okay.
And it took me a while to get comfortable with the ending of that book because
Right.
again, if people read it, it's quite unexpected, I think.
Yeah.
And I can see what the writer was doing. I'm like, yeah, okay, I respect it, but I didn't love it because I'd invested a whole load of stuff in
Yeah.
theories, and I think this is a danger as well, particularly if you've got mysteries in your book. And I guess this might be the thing with crime novels sometimes that if people think they've figured it out and they are certain that their case is watertight, and then you don't deliver on that, they may walk around way going, well, I think I've got a better ending to that, which is I guess is a challenge. So yeah, I think I think that's probably my strongest example that jumps to
Right.
mind.
Well, Tim and I saw it at the cinema, and he's read the book. He's
Yeah.
read everything that Andy Weir has published, and so I don't know otherwise because I've not read the book. But he said the film is very true to the book.
Yes, it is. Yeah, no, it definitely is.
Right. I
And
loved
and
it.
it's really good.
We,
I
when we
really enjoyed it, and I think
when we came out, had we not booked dinner after the movie, we would have gone straight back in again and watched it again.
wow.
Loved it.
Yeah, no,
Really loved it.
yeah. So I mean, and my criticism is not is it's almost a personal criticism rather than
Yeah.
anything else.
No.
I was expecting something that it
Yeah.
didn't deliver, and I get that quite a lot. So it's the thing you get with long-running TV shows, I think. So like Game of Thrones is a great example where obviously they ran ahead of the books and had to finish it off themselves anyway, and a lot of people just don't like the ending to Game of Thrones. And again, I'm kind of like, well, it's what the writers decided to do, and I respect that. But I think the problem is often people invested so much in their own personal theories of how that was all going to pan out. You were never going to live up to that. And I think that's why you often get that with long running TV shows that have been going over kind of sort of 7, 8 years, that
Yeah.
people get immersed in it, they have their own theories, and then you don't deliver on those things. Kind of, I think generally people go, yeah, Breaking Bad ended well. Maybe that's about it.
Yeah.
People are always unsatisfied. Lost is the
Yeah.
right kind of.
But apparently, there's a new one, isn't there? Is it House of Dragons? Apparently, that's truer to
Right. Yeah.
I say apparently. My in-house expert says it's truer to the books
Okay.
than Game of Thrones.
I'll-
But I think as writers, aren't we more critical of what we read anyway? I think, or perhaps think more.
I think I can be, but I always then balance that off with I know how hard it is. So I'm often, I'm quite willing to give a writer credit for what they decide to do. It's their story. They can tell it the way they want. Whether I love it or not is then up to me. And that is the thing that's the bargain you create with your readers. You can't control how they read your book.
Sure. No, exactly. You're never going to know until they leave a review, are you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's delight when people do get what you were trying to do,
Sure.
and kind of when people come back and sometimes people go back, oh, it wasn't quite for me, or it didn't. I was a bit confused by this, or that didn't
Right.
quite land for me.
Which
I
is
think
really useful. It's
you just
useful
have
to
to
have.
you just have to
And
take that, and
Yeah, no, exactly.
As
HJ,
long as everybody's not saying that was a terrible ending, then you've done something well for somebody, and that's all we can hope for.
I was just going to ask HJ, but he's going to go. Oh, here we go. HJ, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. Don't worry,
Hi.
as long as we can hear you, don't worry if the video goes. We've just moved on to, sorry we cut you off or we lost you earlier on. We've moved on to films or books that you've read or seen, vice versa, where you think anything that springs to mind where the ending was disappointing for you.
I don't know. I like the way that Under the Skin built up the actual film,
Okay.
and in some ways, the ending just to me it just dragged out a little bit.
Right.
But I don't. That's just how I was left, you know. But the way that the build up of the film to me was just fantastic, and I enjoyed it more than reading the book. But I just thought the ending, perhaps it was a bit drawn out.
Right. I don't know that one. It reminds me when you're saying about being dragged out that I really enjoy. There's a shortish TV series called Mr. Mercedes, which is based on Stephen King's novel. And I felt at times that could have been shorter. There were parts of it that just felt a little bit too long. Too much for a movie, but this series could have been shorter. And I'm sure in the days now of Netflix and Prime and so on, that you kind of think, well, this could have been a 3-part or something. Jill, did anything come to mind?
Not specifically. I mean, I was trying to think before before it all started. I mean, certainly when I've been watching films, things that always annoy me, particularly horror films, which I do sometimes watch. If it's something I've never heard of normally, and I watch it, and then it just ends where everybody dies. There's no resolution, and you just think, oh, well, that's an hour and a half of my life I'll never see again, and I really don't like that. The only one I thought of it's not a criticism actually at all. I preferred it how it was done in the film, and although I haven't read the story, it's a short story. The Shawshank Redemption, I think in the short story you don't see them meet up by the worthless old boat that he's doing up, or whatever. You only see, I think I've only read this. I haven't read the story, so I've only read what someone said about it, and someone said you don't see that in the story. You only see as far as I think he's probably on the bus or something. And I actually liked it better for the fact that you see the Pacific of the boat and the movie up at the end, because it's a nice, I suppose, because it's kind of a nice way to end a film. It's more cinematic, actually, I suppose. But I don't think it would have been bad the other way. I just like the fact that you see that in the film, and I suppose perhaps I like slightly neater endings than Stephen King does.
Right.
But I don't know.
Yeah, I've got his collections downstairs. Actually, I'll have to dig it out and look. But there's one of his that this is the one when I thought of these questions ahead of time that sprang to mind was Secret Window with Johnny Depp. And there are various endings that you shouldn't do, and some women's magazines, short story guidelines say we don't want twins, we don't want to reveal that the narrator is an animal, etc., etc. But also that, and one thing is not, it was all a dream. And it's plot spoiler. The reveal in The Secret Window is effectively that it was all a dream. It wasn't. It turns out to be a different character.
That's like Bobby Ewing in The Shower, for anyone who's old enough to remember that.
Yeah.
Where you find the whole previous series of Dallas was a dream, because you should go back to the previous, sort of like the series before one, to try and work out what had happened. It was just so confusing that I gave up on it at that point.
Well, there's an animated American TV series called Family Guy, which is part inspiration for Henry the Dog Detective series, and they killed him off. I am going to be doing one of my TNT panels is on children and animals, because they say you can't kill them off in books or films. And there was such an uproar that they'd killed off Brian, because Brian and Stewie are the main two characters, really, even though it's a whole family. They bounce off each other, and they are the main characters. And they had to bring him back. They had him run over, and they had to revive him and bring him back in.
Like Sherlock Holmes.
Exactly. Was it in a barrel of water of Niagara Falls? Damiano, is there anything that springs to mind with you that an ending that either wasn't satisfying or remarkable in a good way?
So kind of interesting in terms of books, could end up reading so many. If a book doesn't end well, it becomes unmemorable. And I find it, and it's harder to recall. I find like something has to be like very bad, very good, and then you remember it. In terms of, I mean, in terms of books, and very good endings that I can still remember how I felt when the ending was revealed, and I still have a feeling. There's a book by Bill might know because it's kind of more in your genre. It's called The Gone Away World by Nick Harkaway, and that has a very good ending to the point that in my mind, I'm not sure that the ending that I remember is the actual ending, but there is a reveal that happens in it, and that's the thing that's completely stuck with me. And it might have continued for a little bit, but I'm not sure. But that's like it was such a big kind of like I dislike being able to predict
Right.
what is going to happen and all the best. So like films like The Usual Suspects and um I think are fantastic because you don't see it happening. So that's like that's great. And it's a bit like with this book as well. And even there's a book, an historical fiction book or series by Con Eagledon, the Emperor of Rome series. And the very first book ends with a reveal of a character who is called something else. Obviously, because in Roman times, like names changed, particularly from their youth to when they became or considered an adult. There was a character in there that his name was revealed right at the end in the very last. It might have even been the last word, and you're like, oh, that and it was just incredibly good and made me want to read the next one, and the next one, and the next one. I think when interesting, Jill, when you talked about was it Patrick Dempsey in Dallas with the whole "It's a Dream," like with TV with TV series. I think the difficulty is when something's long running is that if there's a dispute with an actor or something happens, then they have to rewrite and change what happens, which was part of what the whole Dallas thing. But most recently in Yellowstone, I don't know if anybody has watched Yellowstone series with Kevin Costner. Very, very good. But halfway through the last series, there was a dispute with Kevin Costner and the series creator, and they kind of parted ways, and then suddenly he wasn't in it, and it kind of ruins it. It wasn't the ending that they wanted for it, and they tried their best, but you're kind of like, oh,
Right.
no. And the other thing that kind of creates a disappointing ending for me is that if it's just so irrational or you can't, there's no way that you could have ever have guessed it because there were never enough clues there to begin with. You just feel like you've been cheated. Or if something completely irrational happens, and this happens in fantasy and superhero series, whether it's like comic books or TV shows or films. And the one that sticks out for me is there's a TV series called Titans, um, based on characters of Nightwing, who's Robin and Raven and a few others. And the end, last episode of that particular series, and the ending was like my wife and I were like, we can't watch this anymore because how it ended. But it was so illogical. It was the moment where I'm going to have two human characters. We're going to have the fight, like a battle, to resolve, the conflict. It was the good guy versus the bad guy, and there is another character who's effectively his Superboy, who's Superman, and rather than have Superman help him, because it would make sense because you've got this being who have infinite power, the good guy, disables Superboy with kryptonite so he can go off and fight his nemesis on his own. And it's like, why would you do that?
Right.
Why? It doesn't make any sense. There's no logic to it. There's no sense. There's no sense. Why would you do that? And yeah, they're the kind of things that I find frustrating. And then, yeah, sorry. And then finally, so Jill, like your point on horror films, I think horror films are far more horrific when they don't end well, when there is no resolution, because that way the thing that's kind of kept you on the edge of the seat and the thing that's frightened you the most is still out there, and that's terrifying. And so like I think they're better when they're not resolved, because you're just like, oh.
Right.
I think it depends on how resilient you are. I think I'm not resilient enough. I think there's obviously a lot of people who watch horror films for that actual reason, what you're saying, because they like that. They like that terror. Whereas I quite like to think there's something positive at the end that I can go away and not have nightmares all night. So I think that's just me, probably.
You want a Wicker Man, Jill. All burns up, and that's the end.
No, I want there to be something positive come out of it. Something. It could be something small,
Something that horrifies me more is when it could happen, when it's really believable. I could watch something like The Exorcist and I sit there laughing because to me it's so ridiculous, and
don't even say the word.
It's not horrific. Whereas I still have nightmares about the Halloween films. Jamie Lee Curtis in her bedroom upstairs with a knife wielding and problem we have now with knives on the streets.
There was a bit supernatural element to that, though, wasn't there?
No, there was. Yeah.
Was he really
a
proper person or not? I don't know.
Yeah. But we do now, but for years, I think this is the only house where we've had a knife block in the house. And we've got one of those metal strips that's attached to the walls, so all the knives are there. But from whenever the first Halloween film was, right up to we moved in here 3 years ago, never had a knife block on it. It doesn't mean that nobody can't open the drawer and get a knife out. It's going to take them a second to do that.
It's quite a trope in American films, isn't it? Particularly when you have a knife block and there's one missing.
Yes. Yeah. And in crime novels.
That's what I mean, not just horror, in crime as well. There's always this knife block and one missing.
I'm just thinking about the state of half the drawers in our house, and just thinking that could be a plot point where the murderer gets slowed down by the fact they can't find the knife.
They try to get a knife and brings out a tin opener or something.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, Phil, do you plot your novels? Do you find that when you get to the you may not plot your end, but when you get to the end and think, oh, actually that's a better ending than I thought, now I have to go back, and because I've seen Anne Cleeves a few times in being interviewed at festivals, and she says she doesn't know the ending. I mean, there is a formula to crime novels, obviously, and I did a couple of WI talks the other day, and I said that I'm not a professional dog walker, but I have a dog and I walk my dog, and I'm very disappointed. I'm not, obviously, but I made light of the fact that dead bodies are often found by dog walkers. And I've dog walked for years and never found a dead body. But she says that so she has a formula. She has her dead body. She has her team of detectives and CSIs and so on. And then by the end of it, one of the characters A to F will have been the murderer. Because another thing, following on from Damiano saying, Damiano was saying earlier on, about the fact that, or I think we all were, the fact that you can't have an ending that isn't feasible. So, because I say to people, you've got to have, if you have characters A to F, you can't then have, the murderer was character G, who came in the chapter before last, that had never been mentioned up to that point. Yes, there was a question in there somewhere.
Yeah. And the question was,
yes,
Anne my endings.
I'm terrible. I go off at tangents.
No, it's fine.
Yes, Anne Cleve, she said that when she gets when she finds out, when she's writing it, she finds out who was the identity of the murderer. Then she has to go back and put in clues and red herrings to lead you to that point. Do you find, Phil, when have you done that? Your endings change, so you've got to go back and change things ahead of them.
I think when I start, the ending is often one of the few things I do have. So, in fact, sometimes there's at least one book where I've started and I've got an end. I don't really even have a beginning. I've just kind of gone, okay, I think Joe was talking earlier about the advantages when we're writing a series and you know those characters, so you could just kind of drop into their heads. So it's almost just like let's have them walking down the street and find out what happens. I know where I'm headed, but I don't really know where they're starting off. And so I think the ending's often the thing I do have. It does move, so it's not a fixed point, because sometimes you think of a better thing, or what you had in mind doesn't quite work. There's been at least one situation where I got towards the ending and I was like, I actually don't think I can write that. I don't like it. It was a big action finale, and I was like, actually, I don't quite know how I would tackle that, because that's not really how I write. But also, that would feel very weird in this book, the way the book has shaped up. It is not that kind of, it's not that scale, so that wouldn't work. And so they've shifted a little bit. But I think in each case, each of my books ends broadly where I thought it would. But it kind of, like I said, it moves around a bit like the end of a hose pipe. You turn the water on, the story starts flowing through, and it kind of wiggles around a bit at the end. But it's hopefully it's where you left it when you walked to the tap, turn it on.
Right.
That's an analogy I've never used before. But yeah, so I think, so in terms of what I'll often do is I'll often have to, on the edit, rather than putting in clues, I'll have to take things out, because I will scatter things in based on where I think it's going, and then some of those things won't quite pan out, and I edit. So on the edit, I'll kind of go back through and go, okay, that didn't really pan out. I should take that out because it's just going to be confusing. And in there, I might pepper in some more things for where it actually came. But broadly speaking, I work towards an ending, I think, which is kind of yeah.
Now I know, HJ, we're going to have to head off in a minute.
I do, unfortunately.
Have you been? That's okay. I don't know. This is a random question. Have you had any, when you've got to the end of any of your stories? If there been any you thought, oh, actually, that's a good idea, or I had an idea for the ending, but actually, this is much better, or anything particularly proud of?
One of the most popular stories I've written, which is partly erotic, it's set in 1972 in Basque, my love stories book, and I've also put it out as a book as well, a small book, and the book is the story is called Strange Taste, and it's about one of those parties some of us used to enjoy in the 70s, where all sorts of
the
drinks
dish with the bowl with the keys.
Yeah, all sorts. Yeah, really, really good.
Not that I know about these things, of course.
And meetings, I'm sure you don't, Morgen. And meeting someone, and a sort of a 1 night, 2 night stand, and with an Australian girl. Anyway, I reached an end, and then the end. It was a sad ending. I won't say too much about it. It was no little bite, but it's a bit of a sad ending for the male character who'd met this girl. She went back to Australia, and it was a bit of a sad ending, a bit of a true ending. And I thought, well, I can't leave it like that. I suddenly had this idea, I can't leave it like that. We've talked about prologue, but actually this is more epilogue. But I just took all the main characters forward 30 years.
Okay.
And described what they were doing, what their jobs were, and they're all 30 years older. And it really, really did work very well
Good.
for those characters, including Georgie, the lead character, and what happened to her. And in
Right.
some cases, their lives became quite dull, quite boring
Okay.
compared with. I'm sure all of our lives are much duller than they used to be.
Right.
But it was really enjoyable doing it. But it's not often you can do that when you write. You don't often have the characters all in place, ready for you to take them forward 30, 40 years, and to make it seem realistic when you do it.
Sure.
On that note, I'm going to have to
Yes,
go
thank you.
forward 30 years
Yes.
and go off on holiday.
Enjoy your travels this afternoon.
Well, lovely to meet you all, and thanks for having me. Thank you.
No problem. No
You too.
problem.
Have fun.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Bye. Jill. Keep going.
Yeah.
Yes, we were talking about if we had an idea of the ending and it changes, whether you go back and add in, or you may have an ending that you planned or that you felt as natural, and but you want to add in more. Oh, we've lost Phil as well. Oh no, that's okay.
Oh,
He's still here. There we go. As always, little blip. And so whether, Jill, you've gone back when you get to the end of your first draft, whether you do go back and add in red herrings or clues to fit your ending.
I go back and change a lot. When I write the first draft all the way through so that I know how it's then going to end. And then by the time I get to the end, because the characters have taken it in places I didn't expect, then I have to go back and change things in quite a lot in the second edit, or in the first edit, I suppose I should say, because it doesn't make sense in a lot of cases because they've gone off at tangents. And in some cases, even the characters' relationships with each other, minor characters' relationships might have changed. Like someone who started off as someone's brother might have ended up as their husband, or so.
Right.
I don't mean the same person. I don't mean someone marries their brother. I mean, their role might have changed in the story.
Right.
Or
right.
With regard to the clues, what I've found myself doing, I don't know if anyone else. I'm not sure. I suppose it would. It might apply to some of you as well. But what I find is that if I know some weird fact, I don't know how many people know that. So if I'm putting what I think might be a good clue that people are not supposed to guess, or if it's something I've had to look up in quite a lot, I think, is that just me that didn't know that, or is it just me that did? So I kind of do a test on relatives and friends that will send out to a WhatsApp group or something, saying, okay, on a scale of 1 to 4, have you heard of this? If I describe this, will you know what it is, or whatever, something like that? And if they come back and say, no, not got a clue, then it's fairly safe. The characters won't recognise it, and that it won't spoil the clue, because it won't be unreasonable that they're sitting there saying, "Oh, I don't know where this is going."
Yeah.
You see what I mean? Because if that would be really bad. If you're trying to make something really mysterious, and everyone or 80% of the people reading it are thinking, "Well, I can see where this is going, because obviously that's that," that's not going to be any good. Yeah. And so, I mean, I suppose recently as well, that I had to do something that referred to a kind of a legend that I wasn't sure was very well known. This is for the book that's not out yet. So that I've had to ask quite widely whether people have A, never heard of it, B, heard of it vaguely, C, know the story. Just because otherwise it's not realistic that, or say the police, for instance, that would have immediately cottoned onto it, or do you see what I mean? So I find that's that sort of thing I have to go back and research a little bit and think, does that make sense or not? Mm-hmm. So I don't know if anyone else does that. Or has cause to do that sort of thing, to kind of do surveys on their relatives. Do you?
I haven't done that so much, but there was one day I passed a police officer, and I had a question around language, or around whether something was feasible, whether it would happen or not. So I just stopped him and said, "Do you mind? I've got these questions for you." And he was kind enough in which to listen to the scenario and feedback. So that was good.
Oh, that's very good.
Well, in my experience, they love being asked. They love, you say to them, "I'm a writer." They go, "Oh yes, we'd love to know and love to help you." Because I think they probably read crime novels as well, and think, well, that wouldn't happen. It's a bit like police saying, especially at festivals or I have a neighbour who's I am yet to know. She hasn't never told me herself, but I'm yet to know what her role is in the police. But she is works for the police, and they've. I don't know of a police employee who hasn't said that all TV films and TV series are so unlikely and unfeasible, and that wouldn't happen and this wouldn't happen, and it's all tied up too neatly with a bow, and they pick holes in it. There's really a couple of really good books, actually. I can't remember who they're by, but I've got them on Kindle, of terminology and books for police, books for crime writers. So don't put this in, do this is how it works, and so on and so forth, for writing crime.
It is a bit of a minefield. I think partly because things take so much longer in real life than they normally do in a book. So you can't wrap something up, can you, in the amount of time that Vera would or something on it.
Well, Tim and I watch a lot of Police Interceptors and 24 Hours in Police Custody and all of those, and it's really frustrating when it's a series and you get to have these little vignettes of them being stopped and chased and then caught and then taken into the custody suite, and then put in a cell and so on and so forth. And then at the end of the program, you have the wrap up. This is what happened to each person, and invariably it's they were investigation ongoing. It's a bit like the end of at the end of a book, we want a resolution. We want to know how much, whether they went to prison or they were fined or had points on their license and so on. Whereas invariably now, because everything's taking so long, you get to the end of a program and it's ongoing investigation or call to court, and you don't find out what happened to them.
Or they have to drop it because it's not enough of the CPS or something.
Exactly. Well, I think it's the whole lockdown backlog.
Yeah.
They're just.
That's why it's
like driving license, like driving tests. Got to wait months for a driving test.
Yeah. But that does make it more tempting to kill people, doesn't it? To kill baddies, because it's final. You can say, okay, well, we've resolved that then. They don't bother with the CPS and all that. Yeah. But you can't just go around killing people off all the time. It wouldn't be realistic.
Sorry, Damiano was going to say something.
I was going to say, that's the joys of fiction, whether it's in the book or on the screen. We kind of you can get to navigate around the kind of the boring stuff of life and just kind of create something that's exciting, because ultimately it is, whether you're reading or watching something, it's escapism, and you don't want it to be your everyday life. You want to be thrilled, you want to be scared, you want to be if everything was done as it should be done. It's like advertising, when they're showing how something works. They often have, this is a shortened kind of example of what it is. Otherwise, it's like, oh. So yeah, I think the advantage we have is that we get to play with that, and it's the same with like bringing something to a conclusion at the end. And the other thing as well, I guess, the other advantage of writing fantasy, probably more so than science fiction, because as much as there has to be some kind of reality to it, you are making up your own rules, and you can make up your own laws, and you can make up your own time, and you can make up your own how people react to things, because it doesn't exist. And even to a certain extent with science fiction, but it's a lot more based in almost in like imagining what the reality is going forward. So like Ian M. Banks, for instance, the world he creates and how it works is so real, but it's not.
Yeah.
But you can see it working.
You've kind of nailed why I write what I write there, I think, Damiano. I don't have to be constrained by the real world. I can be inspired by the real world and then run with it to somewhere quite improbable, but I don't have to worry too much about grounding it in reality. Plausibility. So I guess that's the key thing. It's what you was talking about, bringing it back to endings, actually. Kind of that idea that it doesn't you can get away with inaccuracy as long as it is plausible and told in a satisfying and dramatic way. I think that's the other big thing. And yeah, kind of while we've been talking, I've been thinking again about unsatisfying endings and those ones that don't feel like they've been properly earned from a dramatic point of view. That's what big, large bits of exposition that just kind of go, oh well, all the stuff that you didn't, kind of you've got to feel an ending, haven't you? And I think with all of this, kind of the taking the reader on a journey and then landing them somewhere where they feel like, oh yeah, that could happen. Maybe I don't think too hard about whether it really could happen, but kind of that sort of logic, plausibility, and arriving them somewhere emotionally satisfying is that's the skill we're all aiming for, isn't it?
Absolutely. Final question, sort of a two-parter. I'll start with Damiano and then Jill and then Phil. Do you age your characters? And when do you think you will finish your series? So this is kind of a same question because Ian Rankin apparently didn't, he'd only planned a certain point, didn't think he'd be writing as many books as he has. He aged Rebus to the point where at the time, I think in Scottish policing, he had to retire. And then because people wanted more books, he had to bring him back as a consultant, I understand. So Damiano, are you aging your main character? Do you know how many, but you may have answered this earlier on, with how many books you have in this series?
So in this particular series, I aim to wrap it all up in 3 books, because then I want to be able to write something else. So in terms of the timeline, so the first book happens all within a few months. So there's not any kind of considerable amount of aging. In the second book, there is a period of years that pass, but we go to the past and we work our way back up to the present. So it's looking back rather than moving forward. And then the third one again will be within a contained amount, a short period of time, where everything happens, because the point of the first book and as well is that the ante keeps on getting upped and upped and upped as you go along, but it's kind of almost immediate. So no, there won't be any considerable aging on the characters in the Bastard trilogy.
Right, makes life easier. Jill, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, I know my main male character is exactly 30 years younger than me.
Okay.
So it's set in a specific date. So that's kind of all right, because I thought, well, by the time I'm 80, I'll still only be 50. By that time, maybe I should start, or he should start delegating some of the physical stuff a bit. But at the same time, if I'm still writing while I'm 80, I'll be happy anyway, I suppose.
Yeah.
So I'll cross that bridge when I come to it. But so that's, I'm glad you bring it up to date. Although it started in 2019, the story started in 2019, but that was only because there had to be people of a certain age who were just grown up in the Second World War, and they'd have been dead if I took it much further. So it would have been unrealistic. They'd been so much over 100, So
yeah.
So that's why I did that. But I'm bringing it gradually up to date. So he will gradually. There's like, if I bring out a book a year, there's like probably 2.5 years between each book. So eventually I'll meet the present day.
Yeah. Well, I did a couple of, I've never had this before, where I do 2 WI talks in a day. And one of them was 2:00 in the afternoon. And then the second one was a talk in a workshop in the evening, 7:30. And they'd asked me with no notice to judge some books. And so I think about a dozen people had brought in their favourite book. And I had to judge, not really given any spec other than knowing that it was people's favourite books. So it's a bit like choosing our favourite characters or choosing children. So which were my top 3 books? And I hadn't read any of them. And I did explain why I hadn't read them, because it's my day job. But my first choice was Mary Wesley's Chamomile Lawn, because she was 74 when she had her first book published. And there was because you mentioned, Jill, about writing in your 80s, which I hope you still will. But there was something, I get Google News little alerts on my home screen. And I don't know the chap's name because I didn't click on it, but he's just had his first publishing deal at 72.
Oh,
Which is brilliant. Which is brilliant. Phil.
So I get to cheat a little bit with aging characters because my time travel is a core part of the plot of my series. So I have aged characters, but I've often aged them in, brought back an older version of a character into a past time, so that the present version suddenly has an older version. I've jumped back in time, and people have met younger versions of characters that they met before. So there is quite a lot of sort of character aging going on. But I get to both jump around the timeline and also move those people around as it suits me.
Nice.
Which is another great example of me writing in a genre that allows me to not have to worry too much. That's not quite true. I've said not have to worry too much about these things. Actually, I have tied myself in knots with kind of, okay, hang on a minute. So this is the version of the character from 30 years ago. So they shouldn't know this thing that they said happened 10 years ago in the later timeline. And yeah, so I have cheated. I don't know. I've necessarily made it easier for myself. If anything, I might have made it
How
harder.
How do you catalog? How do you catalog? I did say this was going to be the last question, but it's still tied to the last question. Because when I get a book in, if there's any kind of date in there or ages, I created just a word table, and I have the beginning year and then right up to date, unless it's a historical book. And then I have each column is a different character, and it then makes sure that they are the correct age in the correct year.
So I have timeline diagrams. I have random scribbled notes all over the place. But you still, you have to really pay attention, particularly in the multiple rounds of edits, just to make sure that the worst one is always for me, because the timeline isn't necessarily clear. Somebody suddenly discovering something in the past that in a previous book that's set in the future they didn't know, and then you're like, that can't have happened, unless I can find a multiple timeline forking kind of explanation for why that's not the timeline you thought it was. Which can get very confusing for the reader as well. So you have to be careful with that kind of layout. I've had to rewrite whole sections because I messed exactly that.
That's a good thing about being the indie author, is you can go back and tweak something if you realise that you need to change it, and then hope that readers haven't read it already and would notice. Because I think that might have been Ian Rankin, where he'd brought back a police officer who'd been killed off in book 2, and had forgotten that the officer, it may not have been Ian Rankin, but I heard it again the other day. I'd heard it years ago, and brought back a character who died in book 2 and hadn't realised or had forgotten. But that's an editor's job. That's my job, to make sure, if I'm the editor for a whole series, is to make sure that everything is catalogued. Anyway, thank you, everybody. It's been fantastic. Lovely to see you, Damiano.
Thank you.
Phil, always a pleasure.
Yes.
Thank you.
I'm going to go off and see if I can plan out a story where it ends with the narrator was an animal who was a twin.
Oh yes,
and it was all a dream. And then they get killed off.
Absolutely. Why not?
I'm going to take that as a challenge and see what I can do.
Yeah, do. Okay, thank you. See you soon.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.